Welcome to Creative Piecemeal. I'm Tammy Takaishi, a board-certified music therapist. Join me each week as a new guest from across the fine and creative arts spheres shares struggles, triumphs, laughs, words of wisdom, and more in authentic, thought-provoking, and inspiring interviews. Hello and welcome to Creative Piecemeal. I'm so excited to welcome back Jennifer Roig-Francoli. She is the author of Make Great Music with Ease, The Secret to Smarter Practice, Confident Performance, and Living a Happier Life. She is a professional violinist, educator, and Alexander Technique master. She teaches throughout the world, gives workshops, and definitely check out her first appearance on the podcast, which was a little bit ago, this being her second one. You can listen to them in any order, but this one we're going to delve into some other topics, some deeper topics, talking about emotions and how that affects playing and picking up instruments after a long time and delving into playing and making great music with ease. But again, welcome, Jennifer. So excited to have you back.
Oh, I am so thrilled to be here. Thanks, Tammy.
You're very welcome. So one of the things that I love, not just about your book, but about what you do, is you delve into deep topics that really affect players of all levels. You know, working on releasing tension in the body, working on how that may start because of like a psychological aspect. And you even offer like online workshops and other things like that. And I was really struck recently by some of the things you're offering regarding processing really intense emotions, whether someone's going through something difficult in their personal life or because of various world events, and helping that person be able to process and transfer it into their art and using art as a medium. And I was wondering if you could sort of speak to that a little more specifically on the show.
Yes. Well, this is really what I'm most interested in right now. And I'm just experiencing more and more over the years how our environment, how we react to things in our lives, in our relationships, in world events, politics even. We don't need to go there, but everyone's influenced by what's going on around. And there have been a lot of strong emotions flying around. And you look at different parts of the world, there's so many, pretty intense things happening wherever you live, and some places more than others. I feel incredibly grateful to live in the United States right now and to be in a time of peace. But what I'm noticing more and more is how when we react to things around us, the body reacts, the mind reacts, the emotions react, and that reaction can increase our stress levels and our physical tension levels. And if we don't know how to process the emotions we're feeling, then that physical tension doesn't get to soften and release. And then our creativity gets stuck and blocked. And everything that we do is hindered as a result. Like our emotions get in the way of our music making. It's harder to be musical and communicate your heartfelt emotions if you're not processing them. They need to be able to move and flow. And knowing how to do that quickly on the spot when you're on the stage, when you have a thought about some disaster in the world, you can't let that impact your performance. And it requires a lot of understanding and skill to be able to process things quickly and pour your heart into your art freely.
Yeah. I was wondering, what are some things that you do when you're feeling an intense emotion, and, whether it's in the middle of teaching or you're on stage or you're, doing group work. I know for me, as a music therapist, before I go into sessions, I like to ground myself, not only at the beginning of my day, but also taking a few moments before every session. And while that's helpful, there's still moments occasionally where I'll feel an emotion or I will freeze up, and I have to combat that so that it doesn't affect the music making and what's happening in the moment, and so it doesn't block being present with someone. And I know that's just one technique, and I'm just wondering what works well for you.
Yeah, that's a great question. And this is, of course, exactly what I teach my students all the time, but I try to practice what I preach. There's no way I could teach it if I didn't have these tools to use for myself. There are a lot of ways that I do this, but there's like a specific thing that I do that happens super fast so that I can do it even while I'm in the middle of a phrase, while I'm in the middle of a performance. So that's the immediate thing. But there's also kind of a daily practice that I do, which has multiple facets to it. I'm actually running a program right now that is sharing my 5-step process. It's called the 5 pre-pearls for aligned action. So when you have a practice that you can go through every day, you're actually changing the neurology in your brain, right? Because, practice, that's what practice is, where you repeat things over and over again so that your brain fires and wires along the same network. And then so you become skilled at whatever it is that you're repeating. So having a daily practice of going through and processing emotions, looking at what you're facing your fears, and also waking up positive, grateful, joyous, loving side of you as a practice makes it much easier to then do that like backstage before you go out on stage if you're feeling nervous, or something just happened that throws you off and you feel overwhelmed or ungrounded. So if you've been practicing a system regularly, like every day, then you'll remember to do it before you go on stage. You're going to feel better much more quickly. And then when you're in the complex activity of, playing an instrument, for example, and you can't be going through the 5-step process or whatever it is that you do, you have this very, very quick, instantaneous practice that you've practiced that you can do. And specifically, that very quick thing that I do and that I teach my students comes from the Alexander technique. And it's called inhibition. It has nothing to do with Freud, or it was like, if you think about Freud and in everyday language, we talk about inhibitions, meaning like things you're anxious about, or it's not about that. Inhibition is a physiological term that actually is a way to stop thinking in a certain way. And it's like you don't let yourself act on an idea. So for example, if I'm on stage and suddenly I realize that there's this critic in the front row and I have a shoot of adrenaline, right, rushing through my bloodstream really quick. Suddenly I got really nervous. Well, I need to be able to inhibit the next thought, like not go there. I have to have really good control over my mind. So I practice inhibition, which is, a natural skill. We do it all the time without knowing it. But we have to make it conscious. So in that moment that I'm observing my reaction to seeing the critic out there, I notice where my thoughts could easily spiral out of control, and one leading to another and pull me down, and my bow could start shaking and I start messing up. I don't want to go there. So I need to have this skill that I've practiced to stop that chain reaction of thoughts and calm my body, my nervous system instantly by doing what we call constructive thinking. And that is a really specific way of using the brain. It's a way of thinking, even more than the content of the thinking. It's not so much the words or the ideas. It's a specific skill, something you do with your brain. It's harder. I think that's the best I can do to explain that without actually experiencing it.
Yeah, I was going to say, it sounds very similar to the concept of mindfulness. Would you say that's a subset of it?
Yeah, I think it's all related. And ultimately, it's about having conscious awareness of what you're actually doing with your whole self. What am I actually thinking? What's actually happening to my body as I'm responding to this stimulus of having the critic in the front row or thinking? So everything that we experience is a stimulus, like lights, noises, seeing things, hearing things, feeling things from the outside. All of those are stimuli, but how we feel on the inside and every single thought we have is also a stimulus. So like you told everyone, I'm an Alexander technique teacher, and I specialize in primal Alexander, which is a form of Alexander technique that doesn't require touch. And it's also, I always like to say it was created by Mio Morales, my partner, and it's an amazing way to learn the Alexander technique. In Primal Alexander, we prioritize observing how we're thinking. So you get really good at becoming aware of what's actually going on. You observe what you're thinking, how you're feeling in your body, and then you experiment. You get curious. Well, what's happening right now? What am I noticing right now? And that, yes, that's mindfulness, I think. Just being really, really present. As soon as you ask yourself, what's happening to me right now as I am here, having this experience in this moment, it's not, you take yourself out of worry about the future or nostalgia about the past, and you're just present. You're waking up your kind of childlike wonder and curiosity about, oh, I'm actually here. What's happening? Oh, my body's getting tight. Oh, my neck hurts. Oh, I'm shaking. Or, oh, I'm feeling down. My energy is down and depressed. And you start to integrate how you're thinking with how you're feeling in your body. And as soon as you're present to that experience without judging it, you're just being it, then you might start to recognize that you have a choice about the next moment. And you get to think differently to get different results in your body and to start creating and generating different emotions that might be a little more pleasant.
It sounds really neat and very, very important work, for sure.
Stay with us. We'll be right back.
If you've been feeling burned out, stressed, overwhelmed, or exhausted, the resources and courses at the Self-Care Institute are here to support you. The Self-Care Institute was founded by Dr. Ami Kunimura and provides support for individuals and organizations with burnout prevention, burnout recovery, and stress management. I've personally taken a few of these courses and found them to be super helpful, both professionally and personally. The care you give yourself matters just as much as the care you give to others. But if self-care is difficult for you, you're not alone. And the Self-Care Institute is here to support your well-being, resilience, and sense of fulfillment at work and at home. For more information, visit selfcareinstitute.com or go to the show notes and click on the link.
Yeah, and I try to make it really light and fun too, because these concepts can get really kind of abstract and like, what? It can seem really complicated, but actually it's the simplest thing in the world. It's natural to humans to be able to, I mean, that's one of our superpowers as human beings, is to be able to reflect and observe ourselves with a certain amount of objectivity. Almost like I can witness myself almost as if I were a different person. Like I can be aware that this person is sitting on this chair, feeling the floor, feeling the air. I can witness my thoughts. And then I have this unique ability to choose the next one. So we can be conscious and mindful and present and aware. It's that simple. Just by observing without judgment, we're already making changes.
That's really great. And of course, even though you work with musicians, that's the Alexander technique can be for, anyone. They don't necessarily have to be a musician. Would you explain to the listeners a little bit more about the foundations of that?
Yeah, the Alexander technique was developed by an amazing genius of a man who was born in 1869 in Tasmania. And he wanted to be an actor. Long story short, he had a performance issue where he got hoarse on stage when he was performing, and nobody could help him. So he decided that he'd better help himself or else he'd have to quit. And he didn't want to quit because he was very passionate about his art. So he observed himself. Here we are again with the observation, right? He got mirrors and actually literally watched himself to figure out what he was doing to cause the hoarseness. He did this for years and made all kinds of amazing discoveries about how the mind and body work together. And ultimately, he realized that he just needed to think a little differently. And by letting go and being present, just having this certain kind of mindset of non-judgmental, experimental presence, that he could let go of the thoughts that were causing difficulty for him, that was causing his body to get tight and constrict his windpipe and his vocal mechanism. So he was able to change his physiology, his physical experience, how he was feeling in the body, simply by adopting a different attitude and changing how he was thinking. When he changed how he was thinking, his body started to come into better balance. The mind and the body can't be separated. So we talk about mental imbalance. Well, that goes with physical imbalance and vice versa. And so the best way to come into balance is he said, you must start with the mental attitude. And the body does just follow the mind. So if we want to change our posture, for example, we want to change, if we're in pain, physical pain, the place to start is to get curious about how we're thinking and how our attitude may be influencing what's going on physically. Then you become a scientist, a detective, and you just start exploring, well, what's actually happening right now? What am I doing? What am I thinking that might be generating this effect in my body? Pain is just a sign. It's like the body is innocent and it's just reflecting the mind. If I have pain, like if my shoulders are tight and they're starting to hurt, or as a violinist, if my shoulder is always too tight and I start to have back pain, which happens all too often with violinists. If my back is hurting, it's really just my back innocently trying to get my attention and saying, hey, Jennifer, could you please think a little differently because you're causing some pain down here. It's no good. So then I need to reflect, and actually thank my body for giving me that information and reminding me that I need to get curious and pay attention to my attitude and lighten up a little bit, maybe let go a little bit, care a little bit less about being perfect or getting things right, or be a little less perfectionistic and be more present rather than hurrying and rushing and always trying to get somewhere and get something that I think I don't have.
Excellent. So I'm just curious, are you able to talk about any upcoming projects that you're working on or anything else related? Sometimes I interview people and they're not able to talk about upcoming projects, so I'm just curious.
Yeah, actually, you made me think there. I'm like, I'm always involved in projects. But the first thing that comes to my mind is what I am doing all the time is creating projects and classes and master classes and programs and online courses for my students and people out there. The thing that I'm in the midst of creating is a 3-week program really for anybody. It's not just for musicians. It's for musicians, creatives, anybody who wants to bring more creativity into their lives. And the program is called Emotional Alchemy for Your Inner Artist.
Ooh, nice title.
Yeah, thank you. And I even just have to remind myself, the second part of the title is Transform Raw Feelings into Creative Gold. So it's a 21-day self-guided online course. And I'm in the middle of creating that and running that with some people who have dived in at the beginning. For me personally, I'm also kind of in a new creative period where I want to get back to the creative artist in me that carried me through my childhood and teenage years mostly. I was a very artistic kid. My favorite class in school was art. So I loved painting and drawing. And I wrote a lot of poetry. So I loved writing. My dad was an English professor, so I kind of adopted that from his side of the family. So I actually started painting a little bit again recently, and I'd like to get back into some dancing. Basically just having fun exploring different creative outlets for myself. And because I started doing that a couple months ago, that is like what I'm doing for myself is always reflected in the offerings that I give my students and the things I teach. I mean, they say, teachers teach what they have to learn. And that that is so true for me. I'm always teaching people about how to wake up your creativity and follow your intuition and how to get inspired. And honestly, it's really easy for me to feel inspired, but I don't always handle it into creative, artistic things, or at least I don't realize that I do. So I'm exploring different avenues, like I said, painting and writing and all that, just for fun.
That's really great. And, that touches on the fact that, what you invest in yourself, like you mentioned, it pours into the other creative things that you do. You're able to give more to others when you give more to yourself and pay attention to what you need as a person and, whatever that is in the moment. But that's really exciting. Painting can be really, really fun. And I feel like that's one of those things where like you can get messy with it and it can be tactile and.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I love it. And you might laugh. I'm laughing at myself, but I learned something really important recently where I really wanted to get into the paint. I've been wanting to get back to painting for years, but I wrote a book and made a CD, and it's like all these other projects had priority. Having finished the book, though, I'm like, okay, now it's time to paint again. But the way I decided to get into it, because it's been many years, is those classes. They have these franchises now where you can go to a class and have a glass of wine, and they give you the specific painting that everybody's going to paint, and everybody walks out with the same painting. Of course, they're all different. And it's kind of like the last thing I ever would have thought that I would want to do, because my work is all about the art of freedom. And I love the blank page, the blank canvas, silence, where you get to like just improvise and create whatever you want. So I don't like to fit into a box, and I don't like lined paper. So for me to go to this kind of class where they're like, okay, now you're going to make a tree and but it was so much fun, Tammy. I had so much fun, like just because within, and this is the important thing, the analogy for the musicians here is I'm a classical musician, and I'm so trained to follow the rules and play exactly what the composer wrote on a page. It's not like jazz. Jazz has its own rules, of course, but classical music is so prescribed, so much of it. And there are just 1,000 things to pay attention to get it right. It's so challenging for classical musicians to play music and feel free and feel creative when there are so many directions, and the teachers are always talking about very specific details and how to do this. And it's a challenge for classical musicians to break away from that and feel free. And so, yeah, so that's kind of the analogy with the painting, is that even with a prescribed structure, and by the way, Tammy, you're seeing me. I know the people listening can't necessarily see what we're talking about, but that painting back there is the result of that class.
Oh, it's beautiful. I'd been admiring it this whole time, and I was wondering about that.
Oh, thank you. But, it looks a lot like the other ones from the class. But within the structure, you can have infinite possibilities. So I used to play in orchestras quite a lot throughout my life. And that's an example where it's really challenging for a lot of orchestra players to feel like they have creative freedom, because the conductor is the one in charge, and the conductor is the one that gets to decide everything about how these phrases are going to be shaped and the dynamics. And there's a risk for those musicians to feel like they're just part of a machine and being controlled, and that they don't have any freedom, which is not true. If you look deeper, it's like you have to go into a micro plane, right, and see how every single note has infinite potential for your own creative expression. And you just have to work a little harder at it when you're in an orchestra, or if you're making a painting that is going to be sort of the same as everyone else's. Like I got to choose the exact combinations of the colors, and no two paintings are ever going to look exactly the same in those classes. So anyway, I had a lot of fun dipping my toes into acrylics again after all those years.
Nice, nice. And if you don't mind me asking, I love that you said you write poetry. I also write poetry and lyrics and all sorts of things. And obviously everyone's experience with it is different. But I find for me, when I'm experiencing like a lot of emotions and intense emotions, my first reaction as a person who's creative is to write something like poetry or to play something on the piano or whatever. And sometimes merging those together. And I feel like for me personally, that's like and it has been for decades, like the only way for me to really process something. And then once that's through my system, then I can verbally like process it with my therapist and things like that. Just wondering, is that something that occurs in your life as well? Like, does poetry have that role, or is it sort of have a multi-purpose in your life?
Yes, absolutely. I said I didn't want to talk about politics. I don't know if you're comfortable with me speaking generally about politics without going into specifics. Is that
Sure,
okay?
yeah.
So a few weeks ago, we had an event in the United States where there was a very important election. And I happened to wake up that morning and see the results and have some intense emotions. And so when the results were out, it's like, okay, that's a fact. It's done. Past is over. Okay, now I have this information. What am I going to do with it now? The hardest place to be in is uncertainty, I think. So I think it was in some ways more challenging for me the time leading up to that election. And in other ways, it was harder afterwards. But so it's kind of two different things. But once I knew what had actually happened, it's like, okay, that's it. Now, what am I going to do to help myself feel better and process this so that I can get on with my day? So I found out, I think it was around 5 a.m. or something, what the results were. And I needed to teach a student in Singapore at 8 o'clock a.m. So I had a few hours to process everything for myself and then show up as my best self to help this student with her intense performance anxiety. Right. So if I was feeling anxious and upset, I was not going to be at my best to do this work for my student. So it was actually really helpful for me that I had very little time, paradoxically, because I feel really strongly to show up as my best self for other people. So to do that, I have to show up and be my best self for myself. And the way I did it was what you were just talking about. I first had to kind of just feel the emotions, let myself feel it, but then I'm so used to channeling it for myself into something to uplift myself. I've learned this over many, many years, and this is the process I'm teaching my students now because it used to take me a long time to lift myself up if I was down. Now I can do it really, really fast. So I wrote a poem. It's not something I usually do, but in that moment, that was my first instinct. And I did it because I had a strong wish to share my processing with others to help others. That's something also I've learned, that we can help others the most when we are vulnerable in sharing our authentic experience, right? So I did it for myself. I wrote through this poem about processing the emotion and how I was doing it. And in my mind, there's that observer thing where I was kind of watching myself do this, knowing that this was something I wanted to share. This poem wasn't just for me. It was for me. And I knew it was also for others. So it's this funny sort of process that I do that is it's for me and others too. And I was just kind of looking for the poem when it came up. I actually, like within minutes, I posted it on Facebook on my Facebook profile. If anybody's curious, it's still there from that day. So poetry, writing, journaling. When I was a kid, I used to journal a lot. And even as an adult, I would write. I have books and books and books that I wrote. I don't do it that much anymore. Sometimes I do, but poetry is a powerful one.
Yeah, it is. It is. And I'm so glad that that medium was there for you in a time of need and that you were able to, process and reflect and then show up for your student the way that you were hoping.
Yes. Yeah. And then we had a great coaching session because it was real. And I had several that day. And I had one student who was feeling kind of some of the same emotions for the same reasons. And we processed that together. And it's so powerful to just show up and be with someone and be open and feel. But it's not just about feeling the feelings, it's about having a clear desire of where you want to go with them.
Mm-hmm.
So I was mentioning the emotional alchemy program that I'm working with now, and it's available. I take people through this 5-step process I mentioned, and I call it the 5 pre-pearls for aligned action, because they're about something you do before you take an action. It could be when you're backstage before you go out on stage, or it could be at the beginning of a music practice session to sort of kind of set the space, set the stage for what you're going to do next. And those 5 pre-pearls, or the 5 steps, are vision. So you start with your purpose. You start with the end in mind, like, what do I want? And sometimes that's really vague. Sometimes it's just, I want to be happy. Or sometimes it's, I want to be able to play that scale in tune, right? It can be really general, really specific, but you start with some kind of a vision of what you want. It's a desire, wish, goal, right? The second step is to open up to all possibility. And it's like becoming your inner child and waking up that childlike curiosity, being okay with not knowing, and just generating a lot of questions without needing answers. And that's kind of a fun step where you get to just go with your creative stream of consciousness and generate questions like, I don't know, what is a C sharp anyway? Right? Or why is the sky blue? Or why am I feeling like this? And the trick is to not need to answer the questions. You just keep generating questions. And the third step is to lightly touch on your shadow, the shadow side, the darkness, the difficult feelings, just to acknowledge that. I like to call them the doubt monsters to keep it a little light. So we all have darkness and shadow and difficulty. We all struggle. We all suffer. It's part of the human condition. And rather than just sidestepping it and ignoring it or denying it, sweeping it under the rug, we actually just want to say hello to the doubt monsters, feel it a little bit, but not wallow and not stay stuck. Just keep getting curious. Well, what else is showing up? What else? And then we move into the 4th pre-pearl, which is light. And I call them easy affirmations or angels of ease. These are the positive thoughts. It's the, touching on what we can be grateful for, the things that are working well already. Just the fact that we have air to breathe is, cause for gratitude. So any positive light thoughts is what we go into next. And, for my students who are learning constructive thinking and how to practice that inhibition I talked about before, then they start to use that with the 5th pre-pearl, which is integration, where you're bringing your whole self together. I'm here now. And then once you're more integrated, you've touched on all these different aspects of yourself, your mind, your body, your emotions, your creative, joyful, childlike spirit. You bring it all together, and then you're ready to take aligned action, whatever that is, whether it's making music or writing a poem or painting or just having a conversation with your friend. Whatever the action is, it's going to be more integrated, more authentic, and you're open to being inspired and turning, it into something that's more aligned with your vision, what you want.
That sounds like an absolute fantastic course. Is that something that's currently available?
It is actually. Yeah, I have it available on my Facebook profile right now. And if anybody's curious, they can it's not on my website yet, but if anybody's curious, they can email me at jennifer@artoffreedom.me or check out my Facebook profile page. It's there.
Wonderful. I'll include your information in the show notes so that people can get in touch if they're interested in that course. And of course, I'll share the website and where they can check out your other courses and your book. But before we go, speaking about books, what is a book that you've read this past year that has inspired you?
I don't read books. Honestly, Tammy, I was such a bookworm as a kid. All I ever did was play the violin or read books. And I think as a young mother, I must have read every self-help book on the shelf in Barnes and Noble over years. And I've read so many books in my lifetime, but over the last years, I just don't feel like reading anymore. I wrote a book and it's more about output for me, to be totally honest. Now I just have so much creative energy. It's just like I don't have time to read. And the other thing is that I spend a lot of time online since all of my teaching is online. All my work is online. That the last thing I want to do is to use my eyes for reading. So I'm sorry, I don't have a suggestion there.
That's okay. And what I love about your answer is that it's authentic to you and it's authentic to the cycle that you're in right now. You're in a creative output cycle, like why stop that flow? Like you're tuned into that. And, it's not that you wouldn't want to read or have a desire, but, if you've got something going, like why not keep that train going, and the books will still be there,
Yeah, and honestly, I have lots and lots and lots of books that look really great, and I buy them and then I don't read them. So when I'm in the next phase of my life and I get back into reading, I'll have plenty of material.
Well, excellent. Is there anything else you would like to share with our listeners before we go?
Well, I'm reminded of that poem that I referenced, and it's all about being present with silence. And since we're talking about creativity, I feel like it's that void that we need to be able to access inside of us. We need to declutter the mind, let go of the excess tension in the body, relax the nervous system. Whatever we can do to get quiet and silent on the inside so we can hear that very quiet whisper of our creative spirit in the heart. So we need to just be quiet and have that intention that we want to hear what our heart is saying and then dare to follow it. And sometimes that's really scary. So having a process to help us face the fear and do it anyway. That's a great book, by the way. Feel the fear and do it anyway. That's one I read that book many years ago and loved it. I recommend that one a lot.
Excellent. Well, Jennifer, thank you so much for coming back. You're always welcome. And listeners, please check the show notes to buy her books, to find her workshops, and of course, to contact her about her latest workshop, which sounds wonderful. And as always, thanks for listening.
Thanks for listening to Creative Piecemeal. We hope today's episode left you feeling inspired. This podcast is independently created and produced by the host, Tammy Takaishi. More details about today's guest can be found in the show notes, along with links to the podcast's socials, merch store, and ways to support arts organizations AHA Broadway and New Normal Rep, both near and dear to Tammy's heart. Don't forget to visit creativepiecemeal.com, the official podcast website, where you can leave fan mail, write a review, explore Tammy's blog, and discover the growing collection of episodes. Special thanks to our audio engineer, Alex Repetti. Additional narration by Dante Jace. Let's keep celebrating creativity in all its forms.